Ramsey got his name from the fact that he only showed up once a year, like a buck in mating season, made love to his wife Shirley, then headed back to Fredericton to his full-time woman. Buck Ramsey sired 11 children that way. He's just like an old buck, said Lyndon Tucker, remembering what someone had said many years before. An old buck, yeah, an old buck, yeah. Buck the buck, yes, sir. Every time he comes home, he adds a point to his antlers, said Bert Totter. Tee-hee-hee, ha-ha-ha, sob, snort, sniff. When Bert Totter laughed, he sounded at times like he was crying. Bert's mother, Maud, had the philosophy that it was not good to laugh too much. She believed that for every time you laughed, you cried, so she always laughed and cried simultaneously. The only time that Bert was ever seen to cry in his adult life was when Maud had died. Out of the gravesite he went, tee-hee-hee, ha-ha, sob, snort, sniff, and everyone thought he was laughing. Boys, I went to Shirley's to get the mail, and he stunk some bad, said Dan Brennen. Poor bugger, Shad sets beside some o' them young lads in school, and I guess they're pretty coarse, he said at times. He can hardly stand the smell of that Dryfly, and that paladin, said Bob Nash. Well, they never took a bath in their life, said Tad. They just smell like a cheeseless rag barrel, said Bert Totter, and laughed, or cried. That surely don't look after them, you know, said Dan. They claim that Buck's making all kinds of money in Fredericton, said Stan Tooney. Boys, if he is, he ain't spending it on her, said John Caston. No, he ain't spending it on her, is he? John, old boy, commented Lyndon Tucker. No, sir, he ain't spending it on her, that's for sure. The postmistress, Shirley Ramsey, and her family were always the favorite topic of conversation at Bernie Hanley's store. The only time that the men didn't talk about Shirley was when one of the Ramseys was there. The Ramsey boys seldom frequented Bernie Hanley's store. They couldn't afford to. That Shirley Ramsey'd be a good woman for you, Lyndon, said Bert Totter. This is the way that Bert had making fun of Lyndon and Shirley at the same time. I don't want nothing to do with the legs of that old bag, so I don't. Can get a better woman than that if I want, so I can. Tee-hee-hee, ha-ha-ha. Yeah, don't think she looks too good in the morning, do you, Lyndon? Couldn't stand the smell of her. And so went on the conversation. When they exhausted Shirley Ramsey, the conversation drifted to the price of pulp, gold in the Yukon, cars, and whether or not they had enough potatoes in their bins to last them until digging time. Then, one by one, they reluctantly, the most reluctant of them all was Bert Totter, sauntered off home. Dryfly lay crying on the mattress amidst the coats and rags. They could not make him go to school. He would not go today, tomorrow, or any other day. He would never go to school again. For the 10th time, Shirley yelled, "Get out of here, Dryfly, get out of here and eat your breakfast before it gets cold." "Whoever heard of bread and molasses getting cold?" yelled Dryfly in a fit of temper, caught himself and moaned. "Besides, I'm too sick to eat. I'm poisoned, so I am. Sick me arse. A little bit of rabbit crap never hurt nobody. If you don't get out of here and go to school, I'll give it to you old Nutbeam, and you can live in the woods and be a hermit just like him. Is that what you want to be? You want to be a hermit for the rest of your life?" Being a hermit wouldn't be too bad, thought Dryfly. It would kind of be nice to live alone in a snug camp in the woods and not be tormented with thoughts of school, and being alone would mean not having to face Shad Nash ever again. What's more, I'd never have to be contend with the Protestants. Is that why Nutbeam lives in the woods, wondered Dryfly? Could the giant Nutbeam be living in the woods alone because he'd picked on the Protestants? Dryfly went through the events of the previous day. Everything went well until noon hour, when the 16 children who made up the Brennen Siding school were set free by Hilda Porter to eat their lunch. The March sun had weakened the crusty snow so that it gave way periodically beneath the feet of the 4 boys who wandered into the woods, freeing in the schoolyard. On the sunny side of a clump of jack pine, the snow had receded several feet, and it was here, sheltered in the wind, on the dried pine needles. Pine and spruce needles were locally referred to as sprills. The boys sat to eat. Max Caston and George Hanley were both in grade 6. Shadrach Nash was in grade 5, and Dryfly Ramsey was in grade 4. They were all the same age. Max Caston was fat, with tiny shifty eyes that peeked over puffed and shiny cheeks. The style of his hair had obviously been simplified with a piss pot. He wore a blue-eyed hunting jacket, heavy green woolen pants, and black rubber boots that came just to below his knees. Max was the son of John Caston, and perhaps because he was constantly being preached to, he was obsessed with, and plagued by mistrust and fear. John knew that he himself would never become a preacher, but he was determined to make one out of Max. Max had been told to respect and fear God, that Satan was forever present, that God was everything that was good, and Satan was everything that was evil. Fearing both God and Satan meant that Max feared everything. George Hanley's ears, hands, and feet all seemed too big for the rest of his body. The size of his ears indeed seemed exaggerated because of the brush-cut style of his black hair. George played with girls a lot, but because his father ran the store, he was never teased as being a sissy. He was too vulnerable a friend. He could steal things for you from the store. Stealing was the only way George could get anything from the store, because burning gave him nothing. Shad Nash had fiery red hair, cut by Dan Brennen for the price of a package of tobacco and a book of papers. He was slightly smaller than the rest, and his tiny body was clothed neatly in a black windbreaker, blue jeans, and leather-topped gumshoes. He had pale ivy eyes and a cluster of freckles that contrasted with his white skin. Shad was a fast talker and seemed forever in control. These were traits he'd developed coping with his father's frustrations and moodiness. Unlike the others, he'd been to the village, Renouse, and even Newcastle. He came from the first family in Brennen Siding to own an indoor toilet. Dryfly was a mystery boy, not weird like his brother Paladin, but still mysterious. Perhaps his mystery came from the fact he was a Catholic and God only knew what God they prayed to. Dryfly was thin, had broken teeth, and a long snotty nose and peaked chin. His clothing never fit him right. Hand-me-downs from whoever took pity on him, and he smelled like rag barrel. There on the pine needles, the sprills, a rabbit had taken a meal the previous night, nibbling at the grass and the blueberry bushes that yesterday's sun had uncovered. Shad eyed the tiny dung balls the rabbit had left. He bit into a large, round, hard molasses cookie. All the boys except Shad drank tea from pickle jars. Shadrach had a thermos with the picture of a cowboy twirling a rope on it. He ate from a square lunchbox that matched his thermos. Max and George ate from Ganong's hard-track candy buckets. The Ganong's candy bucket had a picture of a Ganong's candy bucket on it, which had the same picture on it, etc., into infinity. Dryfly ate from a chocolate box that had seen better days. The chocolate box, with the barely distinguishable rainbow across the top, had one soggy piece of bread and molasses in it. At Crow Cod, prophesying spring, the four boys were saving hockey cards from the 5-cent bags of Hatfield potato chips. Shad had found a second Bobby Hull card in last night's treat and knew that Max had 2 Andy Bathgates. With Andy Bathgate added to his collection, Shad would have had the whole New York Rangers team. Shadrach endeavored to trade with Max. You wouldn't want me to trade your Andy Bathgate for a Bobby Hull, would you, Max, old buddy? Can't, I already have Hull, and I gave me other Bathgate to Dryfly. Who gave your Andy Bathgate to Dry? What for? I don't know. I thought he'd like it, I guess. I'll give you a Bobby Hull for it, Dry. I'm looking for a Boom Boom Geoffrin, said Dryfly. Want to play cowboy after school? I'll throw you in a Moose Vasco, said Shadrach. That's a Bobby Hull, and a Moose Vasco for one old Anthony Bathgate. Nope, I might consider a Gordie Howe, though. Got a Gordie Howe? Just the one, sighed Shack, wondering how he'd go about swinging a deal. Sounds like a pretty good deal to me, Dry. I'd trade with him if I was you, said George. You want to play cowboy after school, Shad? Asked Dryfly. I don't know, maybe. I'll play, said Max. Me too, said George. Maybe, said Shad. I'll tell you what, said Dryfly. You give me your Bobby Hull and Moose Vasco, and let me play with your cap gun after school, and I'll give you me Andy Bathgate. Dryfly wasn't very concerned about hockey cards anyways. His family could rarely afford to buy potato chips, which made it practically impossible to collect any amount of cards, nor did he know one hockey player from another. With no radio, he never got to hear a hockey game. Shad gave the deal some thought. He needed that Andy Bathgate, but Dryfly was striking a hard deal. Moose Vasco wasn't that easy to come by either, and giving up that cap gun would mean that Dryfly would get to be the good lad. Dryfly would be Roy Rogers on Trigger, or the Lone Ranger. The best Shadrach could hope for, under the circumstances, was being Pat Brady or Tonto. Shad hated using a stick for a gun. What if you broke my cap gun, he asked. I won't break it, promised Dry. But you might. I won't. What would you do if you did? I'd buy you another one. What with? What would you use for money? Beer caps? I won't break your gun. Upon me soul, I won't. Well, I might let you use it for one short game, if you're careful. Nope, all evening. I never get to be the good lad. Me neither, put in George Hanley, slurping his tea. I'm always the bad lad, said Max Caston, and it's always our barn that we play in. We can play in our barn if you want, said George with a glitter of hope in his eyes. It was true, perhaps because of his ears, or God only knows for what reason, he was never selected to be the good lad. You lads don't have a cap gun, snapped Shadrach. Like I told you 1,000 times, you can't expect Roy Rogers or the Lone Ranger to go riding around with a stick for a gun. Well, it ain't fair, grumbled George. Well, that's me deal. Take it or leave it, said Dryfly. Shad couldn't handle the trading any longer. He wanted the Andy Bathgate too much, and he'd be ahead of the others anyway. With his full set of New York Rangers, it would be weeks before any of the others collected that many, and by the time they did, he'd probably have a set of the Toronto Maple Leafs or even the Montreal Canadiens. Okay, said Shad, you got a deal, but if you break me cap gun, you're dead. I ain't gonna break it. I want to be the Lone Ranger for the first game and Roy Rogers the second. If there's a third, I want to be Matt Dillon, and you must cross your heart and hope to die that you'll show up with the cap gun. Cross me heart, said Shad, and give me the card. The boys traded cards, all knowing that Dryfly, for the present, was the winner. Shad was not about to be bettered by an Irish Catholic, however Shadrach Nash had a new scheme. Shadrach Nash had thought up his new scheme while he was eating his first molasses cookie. When he felt the time was right, Shad said, let's play a game, boys. Sure, what game? Said Max. Let's see who can open his mouth the farthest, said Shadrach. I bet I can. How much do you want to bet? Asked Dryfly, feeling confident. I bet you this marble, said Shad. Let me see the marble, said Dry. Nope, you have to take me word for it. I'll give this marble to the one with the biggest mouth. A marble was a rare thing in Brennen Siding, but the boys all knew that Shadrach Nash was the most likely to have one, and he definitely seemed to be hiding something in his hand. Okay, said Max, I'll give it a go. Me too, said George. Count me in, said Dryfly. I could do with a marble. Okay, said Shad, we'll judge each other. I'll count to 3, then everyone gape as wide open as they can. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Max, George, and Dryfly all opened wide, revealing their cookie-coated tongues and teeth. Shad started to do likewise. But instead, he took careful aim and tossed the marble into Dryfly's mouth. The marble was not a marble, however one of the dung balls the rabbit had left behind. When he saw that his aim had been perfect, Shad snorted with laughter, spraying tea and cookie crumbs all over the blue-checked hunting jacket of Max Caston. The first thing Dryfly did was swallow. Secondly, he gagged. Thirdly, he ran home crying. Dryfly could still hear the boys laughing when he crossed the railroad tracks. He felt he would never be able to face his friends again. In his bed of old coats and rags, Dryfly could still hear them laughing. I'll hear them laughing, he thought, for the rest of my life, Dryfly sighed. I'm a hermit already. If you don't get out here and go to school, I'm gonna go out and cut a switch, yelled Shirley from the kitchen. Dry relaxed a bit. Shirley's threat was idle, had lost its spark. Her tail's probably wagging, thought Dryfly, and began to plan his day of freedom. Dryfly was right about the spark. Shirley had lost it, but her tail was not wagging. Shirley had lost her spark the time that Buck came home. In a manner of speaking, Buck's last visit was the last time she had wagged her tail to any degree. It's been, Shirley counted, 5, 6, Dryfly's 11, must be 12 years since Buck was here. No letters, no money. What's become of him, I wonder? Although Shirley was not aware of the anniversary, Buck had landed 12 years ago to the very day. Paladin was the baby. Junior's 12. Bonzi was still alive. Buck had taken her to the Legion in his old Ford. He drank 3 beers, and Buck had a half dozen or more. They danced. She remembered he smelled of aftershave, and his hair had been slicked back with that fancy grease stuff. When the Legion closed, they went to Bob Nash's and drank rye until 4 in the morning. Bob played the banjo, and Buck played the guitar. He sang Hank Snow and Doc Williams songs. Buck had been the hit of the night, and Shirley had never been happier in her life. Later, they drove round to the pit and parked. Buck put his hand on her knee and told her how pretty she was. Then he said he loved her, and then he got serious. I suppose you're wondering why I never send you any money, he asked. No, Buck, I know you ain't got any. Had me a job as a janitor for a while. Good job, too, only had to clean the ground for. What happened, Buck? Got caught stealing? Took some old geezer's pipe and it fell right out of me pocket in front of the boss. Fired me on the spot. Living in Fredericton now. Working at the bottle exchange and junkyard. Breaking batteries mostly. No money in it though. How you getting along? Gladys sent me a bag of clothes and Dad sent me a bag of potatoes. Know what I'm thinking about doing? Getting in the back seat? Buck slid his hand up her thigh. Don't be foolish. No, I'm thinking about taking over old Maud's post office. Can you do that? Sure can. All you have to do is collect the mailbag at the siding, bring it home, and give it out. Stamp a few letters. Anyone can do it. And Bert said he'd like me to do it. $30 a month. Why can't Bert do it? Can't read. Maud did it all. I'm going to set it up in the living room. I'd ask you to come to Fredericton with me, but there'd be no room for the kids. I know, Buck. I know you mean well. What do you think of me running the post office? You'll have to do it, I guess. It'll be good for you. You could come home and help me. Buck, I'd run the post office, and you could go to work. Who for? You could talk to Frank Layton. He might give you a job at the club. I ain't working for Frank Layton. Why? Frank's a fair man. I'd rather break batteries. You got another woman in Fredericton, Buck? You know I ain't got no other woman, Shirley. You know I ain't that type of man. Then why won't you come home? Let's not talk about that now. Let's get in the back seat. You're crazy, Buck. If I do come home, I'll have to go back and get me clothes and me radio. You got a radio? Yep. Heard the last Joe Louis fight, settin' right back in Fredericton. Ever heard of Hank Williams? The conversation continued. Shirley fell in love again, and Buck negotiated seduction with promises and lies. Shirley was never happier. Buck was leaving, and he hadn't asked for her family allowance check. They climbed in the back seat, and Shirley wagged her tail to Buck's delight. 9 months later, Shirley added another point to Buck's antlers and called it Dryfly. Dryfly figured the time was getting on to 9 o'clock. The rest of the children had already left for school, and Dryfly was left to himself to enjoy the little room. Dryfly shared his bed with Paladin and Bean. Jug and Ugin slept in the bed across the room. Nagy slept in Shirley's bed, and Nini and Bossy slept in the room next door. Junior was married to Mary Stewart and lived with Mary's father, Silas. Digger, as usual, was trampling the road somewhere. Skippy, the oldest girl, wasn't married, but wasn't shacked up with Joe Moon in Quarryville. Joe Moon had a dog that occupied most of his time than Skippy. Skippy was the homeliest one of the family and considered herself lucky to be living with a bootlegger. Bonzi, of course, was dead. It happened on a Sunday. The family was having a picnic back of the big hollow. Some of them were fishing in the nearby brook, others sat in the shade discussing members of the opposite sex and some picked flowers. Paladin, Bonzi, and Dryfly were pretending they were moose. I need to have a dump, said Bonzi, and hurried into the woods in search of a roast. Ramsey found his roost, a broken-down birch tree, and dropped his pants, sat, and found relief. He was just pulling up his suspenders when he heard the sound of rustling leaves and the crackle of a dead alder bush giving way to a passerby. The sound was nearby, but it was only a sound. He could see nothing but the trees and underbrush of the forest. Who's there? He called. No answer. Bonzi waited and listened. Who's there? He called again. It would be just like Paladin and Dryfly to be watching a lad having a dump, he thought. They're probably trying to scare me. All right, boys, come out. I know you're there. He heard the sound again, but this time it had moved. It was more to the left. Without giving what he thought was Paladin and Dryfly any chance to flee, he dashed into the bush, thinking it would take them by surprise. There was nobody there. He listened once more. Paladin, Dryfly. The song of a bird came up from the brook. He could not identify it. When I get my hands on you lads, I'm going to introduce you to the rough and tumble, he shouted. He hoped he sounded like the Lone Ranger. There was a bit of a cheering ahead of him, where the sun had nourished the ferns to waist height. He thought he saw an unusual movement in the midst. He went to check it out. Nothing. Must have been a bird, he thought. The hell was his? He yelled, turned, and headed back to where he thought the family would be. He walked for half an hour, realized they couldn't be that far away, turned and walked for an hour, came to a barren, and realized he was very lost. He zigzagged back and forth for several more hours, calling, Mom, Paladin, Dryfly, Nagy. Occasionally he got an echo, but that was all. He grew warm and panicky. His pace quickened. He scratched his arms and legs on dead limbs and brush. The flies found him. At dusk, he found himself at the barren's edge once again. He didn't know if he was on the near or the homeward side of it. When you step into a barren, your foot sinks an ankle deep into a wet, moss-like vegetation. When you wander into a barren, you'd better mark your point of entry, for once you get in a few hundred yards, everything starts to look the same. Look down, look up, and you're lost. Bonzi thought he saw something on the barren. Bonzi was already lost and had nothing to lose. He headed toward the something. It took him a half hour to get to what he was looking at, and it turned out to be a huge boulder. Exhausted, he sat on the boulder to watch the stars as one by one they appeared. He cried for a long while, slept for a little while, then cried some more. He heard something walking splush, splush, splush off to his right. He held his breath. For better hearing, he prayed a silent Hail Mary. Splush, splush, splush. Whatever it was passing him by. At first he thought it might be a bear or a moose, but he wasn't sure. It could be a man. It could be a man looking for me. I got nothing to lose, he thought. Whoop, over there. A game warden found the fly-bitten, crow-pecked body of Bonzi a month later, back of the barren. As a result of Bonzi getting lost, Dryfly feared getting lost more than anything else in the world. The thought of him being alone in the woods to battle the flies horrified him. He even had nightmares about it. The flies, the more you battled, the more you attracted, would be the worst thing of all, and to die and have your body exposed to the woods. Years later, when Dryfly was asked the whereabouts of Bonzi by an elderly, absent-minded teacher, he replied, "He went for a crap, and the crows got him." Dryfly was giving way to slumber when Shirley passed through the curtain that served as the bedroom door to stand before him at the foot of the bed. "I've made up your lunch, Dry," said Shirley, "and wrote an excuse to the teacher for you. I'm going to need you home tomorrow, Dry, so I don't want you to go to school today. I got your lunch all packed." The emotional cloud over Shirley was thick and black, and it spread over Dryfly, as if instructed by a magic wand. His heart quickened, his stomach fluttered, and tears of defeat commenced to flow. "But I can't, Mom," he sobbed. "You might have to stay home tomorrow, Dry. We've even run out of grub, so I want you to go today." "But I'm sick, Mom." Tears, tears, tears. "I'm going to write your father asking him to send me enough money for that cap gun you like in the catalog. Come on, Dry darling. You be a good boy and go to school. I'm not getting any younger, you know. One day I won't be around to look after you, and you'll need lots of schooling, so you can get a job." Mom." Still more tears. "You can stay home tomorrow, Dry, 'cause I ain't got the heart to send you to school on an empty stomach. But you have to go today. Come on, Dryfly, darling, get dressed. You still have time." "But I don't want to go." Poor Ninny didn't take nothing to eat with her. "Said you could have it. Dry, poor little thing, was thinking of you and how you'd like a good sandwich. So come on, Dry." Dryfly knew he was defeated, and he could make sure that Shirley's victory would be a difficult one. He cried all the time. He was getting dressed. He cried in the kitchen and refused to eat his biscuit and molasses. He was still crying when he crossed the tracks. When Hilda Porter opened Shirley Ramsey's excuse note for Dryfly's absence on the previous afternoon, it read, "Dear Mrs. Porter, Dryfly stayed home in the afternoon yesterday, for he was sick from rabbit dung poisoning. Yours truly, Shirley." Hilda Porter already knew. Shadrach Nash was not laughing as he watched Dryfly Ramsey enter the school, deposit his excuse on the teacher's desk, and make his way to his seat. The memory of Hilda's 2-inch wide, foot-long piece of woodcutter strap on his stained hands took care of that with little pleasure. Nothing was ever kept secret in Brennen Siding.